Rejected by 50 law schools, Tanya Mitchell's dream of becoming a lawyer seemed impossible. Years later, an unexpected nomination catapults her to the highest court in the land, changing the face of justice in America. Subscribe to our channel and watch how one woman's determination transforms rejection into a historic triumph. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Detroit Public Library flickered overhead as Tanya Mitchell hunched over a worn law textbook, her dark eyes scanning the pages with fierce determination. At 22, Tanya was a bundle of ambition wrapped in second-hand clothes, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun that spoke of practicality over styles. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but Tanya barely noticed, too engrossed in the intricacies of constitutional law to care about the late hour. A gentle hand on her shoulder startled her from her studies. "Tanya, honey, we're closing up," said Miss Jenkins, the kind-faced librarian who had become accustomed to shooing Tanya out at closing time. Tanya blinked, suddenly aware of the ache in her back and the dryness in her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Jenkins. I lost track of time again." The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. "You're working yourself to the bone, whew, child. When's the last time you got a full night's sleep?" Tanya managed a tired smile as she began packing up her books. "Sleep is for people who aren't trying to change the world, Ms. Jenkins." Miss Jenkins shook her head, a mix of admiration and concern in her gaze. "The world will still need changing tomorrow, Tanya. You need to take care of yourself, too." As Tanya stepped out into the cool Detroit night, the weight of her dreams pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. The streetlights cast long shadows, and in the distance, she could hear the faint wail of sirens, a sound all too common in her neighborhood. She walked briskly, her mind racing with the day's studies and the looming specter of her latest rejection letter. 50. That's how many law schools had turned her down now. 50 doors slammed in her face. 50 times she'd been told she wasn't good enough. Didn't fit the mold. Wasn't what they were looking for. But Tanya Mitchell wasn't one to give up. Each rejection only fueled her determination, stoking the fire that burned in her chest since she was a little girl watching her father being wrongfully arrested. She'd promised herself then that she would become a lawyer, that she would fight for justice in a system that seemed designed to work against people who look like her. As she rounded the corner to her apartment building, a group of young men loitering nearby caught her attention. Their eyes followed her, and Tanya felt the familiar tension creep into her shoulders. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked with purpose, projecting a confidence she didn't always feel. "Hey, sister," one of the men called out. "What you got in that bag? Law books." Tanya hesitated, then stopped, turning to face the group. "That's right," she said, her voice steady and clear. The man who had spoken stepped forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and something else. Respect, maybe. "For real, you studying to be a lawyer?" "I am," Tanya replied, her grip tightening on her bag. The man nodded slowly. "That's what's up. We need more of us in them courtrooms. You feel me?" Too many brothers getting locked up for nothing. Tanya felt a surge of emotion, pride, determination, and a deep-seated anger at the injustices she'd witnessed. "That's exactly why I'm doing this, to fight for our community, to make sure we get fair treatment under the law." The other men in the group had drifted closer, listening intently. One of them, barely more than a teenager, spoke up. "But how you gonna do that when they won't even let you in? I heard it's hard for people like us to get into them fancy schools." Tanya's jaw set in a determined line. "They might not let me in through the front door, but I'll find another way. There's more than one path to becoming a lawyer, and I'm going to find it." The first man who had spoken nodded approvingly. "I like that fire, sister. You keep at it. We're rooting for you." As Tanya continued on her way, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Those young men on the street corner, they were why she couldn't give up. They were why she would keep pushing, Keep studying. Keep fighting against a system that seemed determined to shut her out. In her small, cluttered apartment, Tanya kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her second-hand couch. Her eyes fell on the stack of rejection letters on her coffee table, each one a stinging reminder of the barriers she faced. But next to them sat her laptop, open to a web page about alternative paths to becoming a lawyer. With a deep breath, Tanya pulled the computer onto her lap and began to read about apprenticeship programs and ways to take the bar exam without attending law school. It was an unconventional path, fraught with its own challenges, but Tanya felt a glimmer of hope. As she researched deep into the night, Tanya's mind wandered to the future she envisioned, standing in a courtroom, fighting for justice, being a voice for those who had been silenced. She imagined the pride on her parents' faces, the inspiration she could be to young girls in her community. The road ahead would be hard, she knew, harder than anything she'd faced before. But as the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Tanya Mitchell made a promise to herself. She would become a lawyer, no matter what it took. And someday, she would use her position to open doors for others like her, to change the system from within. With renewed determination, Tanya closed her laptop and headed to her tiny kitchen to make a strong cup of coffee. As she waited for the brew to percolate, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Aisha. "Girl, you up. I got some news about that paralegal job I told you about." Tanya's heart raced as she quickly typed back, "I'm up. What's the news? Good or bad?" The reply came almost instantly. "Good. They want to interview you tomorrow. This could be your foot in the door, Tanya." A smile spread across Tanya's face as she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the first step on her new path. She took a deep breath and texted back, "That's amazing, Aisha. I can't wait to hear more. Can you meet me for coffee before my shift at the diner? I need all the details." The smell of fresh coffee and the buzz of early morning conversations filled the small diner where Tanya and Aisha sat huddled in a corner booth. Tanya, still in her waitress uniform, leaned forward eagerly as Aisha filled her in on the paralegal position. "It's at Johnson Marks, that civil rights firm downtown," Aisha explained, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "They're looking for someone smart, driven, and passionate about social justice. Sound like anyone we know." Tanya's heart raced at the possibility. Johnson Marks was known for taking on high-profile cases, challenging systemic racism and discrimination. Working there, even as a paralegal, could be the break she needed. "It sounds perfect," Tanya breathed. "But Aisha, you know my background. No law school, no fancy degree. Why would they even consider me?" Aisha reached across the table, squeezing Tanya's hand. "Because you're brilliant, kind girl. And because Marcus Johnson, the founding partner, he's all about giving opportunities to people from our community. He believes in alternative paths, in fresh perspectives." As Tanya processed this information, a commotion near the diner's entrance caught her attention. A group of suited men had entered, their loud voices and dismissive gestures towards the young black hostess setting Tanya's teeth on edge. "I said we need a table for 4, now," one of the men demanded, his tone dripping with condescension. "Is that too difficult for you to understand?" Without thinking, Tanya was on her feet, moving swiftly towards the scene. She placed herself between the hostess and the agitated customer, her stance firm and her voice clear. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and speak to our staff with respect," Tanya said, meeting the man's surprised gaze steadily. "Sarah here is doing her job efficiently and professionally. If you can't treat her with basic human dignity, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave." The man sputtered, his face reddening. "Do you know who I am? I could buy and sell this entire block." Tanya didn't flinch. Your wallet size doesn't dictate your worth as a human being, sir. Sir, in this establishment, everyone is treated with equal respect. A tense moment passed before one of the man's companions placed a hand on his arm. Come on, Richard. Let's go somewhere else. As they turned to leave, Tanya caught a glimpse of admiration in the eyes of one of the other men in the group. As the door closed behind them, Sarah turned to Tanya with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. No one's ever stood up for me like that before. Tanya gave her a warm smile. We have to look out for each other. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. Returning to Aisha, who had witnessed the entire exchange, Tanya found her friend grinning from ear to ear. And that, my dear, is exactly why you're going to ace this interview and become the best damn paralegal Johnson Marks has ever seen. The following week found Tanya stepping into the polished offices of Johnson Marks, her heart pounding but her head held high. She had spent every spare moment preparing, researching the firm's cases, and practicing her responses to potential interview questions. As she was led into the conference room, Tanya was surprised to see not just the hiring manager, but Marcus Johnson himself sitting at the table. She took a deep breath, channeling the same strength she had shown in the diner. Ms. Mitchell, Marcus Johnson began, his deep voice filled with warmth. I've heard some interesting things about you. Tell me, why do you want to work for our firm? Tanya met his gaze, her passion evident in every word. Mr. Johnson, I believe that the law should be a tool for justice, not a weapon of oppression. Your firm fights for those who have been marginalized and silenced. I want to be part of that fight, to learn from the best, and to bring my own experiences and perspective to the table. As the interview progressed, Tanya found herself sharing not just her knowledge of the law, but her personal experiences, the rejection letters, her alternative study methods, and her unwavering determination to become a lawyer despite the obstacles. Ms. Mitchell, Marcus said as the interview drew to a close, I have to say, I'm impressed. Your lack of formal legal education might be seen as a disadvantage by some, but I see it as an asset. You've shown incredible resourcefulness and determination. Those are qualities we value highly here. Tanya's heart soared as Marcus continued. We'd like to offer you the paralegal position, with one condition. We want to support your journey to becoming a lawyer. If you're willing to continue your studies while working here, we'll provide mentorship and resources to help you prepare for the bar exam. Tears pricked at Tanya's eyes as the reality of the offer sank in. This wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, a chance to pursue her dreams in ways she had never imagined possible. Mr. Johnson, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I promise I won't let you down. Marcus smiled, extending his hand. Welcome to the team, Tanya. I have a feeling you're going to shake things up around here in the best possible way. As Tanya left the office that day, her step was lighter, her spirit buoyed by newfound hope. She pulled out her phone to call Aisha, eager to share the news, when a notification caught her eye. It was an email from one of the law schools she had applied to, her 51st application. For a moment, Tanya's finger hovered over the delete button. Did it even matter now? But something made her open the email, and as she read its contents, her eyes widened in disbelief. Dear Ms. Mitchell, it read, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into our evening law program. Tanya's mind raced. An acceptance, after all this time. And now, an incredible opportunity at Johnson Marks. Two paths suddenly opened before her, where before there had seemed to be none. As she stood on the busy Detroit street, the world buzzing around her, Tanya felt the weight of the decision before her. Each choice would shape her future, her career, her ability to make a difference in the world. She took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. Whatever path she chose, Tanya Mitchell was going to become a force for change. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. With renewed purpose, Tanya dialed Aisha's number. As the phone rang, she smiled to herself, knowing that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. "Aisha," she said as her friend picked up. "You're not going to believe what just happened." 5 years passed in a whirlwind of late nights, coffee-fueled study sessions, and groundbreaking cases at Johnson Marks. Tanya had chosen to accept both opportunities, working as a paralegal by day and attending law school by night. It was a grueling schedule, but one that allowed her to gain practical experience while pursuing her formal education. On a crisp autumn morning, Tanya stood before the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting her suit jacket. The woman who looked back at her was a far cry from the uncertain young woman who had once pored over law books in the public library. Her eyes held a fierce determination, tempered by the wisdom of hard-won experience. Today was the day she'd been working towards for years, her first day as a licensed attorney at Johnson Marks. As Tanya entered the familiar offices, she was greeted by a chorus of cheers and applause. Her colleagues, many of whom had become close friends over the years, had gathered to celebrate her achievement. Marcus Johnson stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. "Tanya Mitchell, Esquire," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I knew from the day I met you that you were going to do great things. Welcome to the team, as a full-fledged attorney." Tanya felt a lump form in her throat as she looked around at the faces of those who had supported her journey. "Thank you all," she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "I couldn't have done this without each and every one of you. Now, let's get to work. We've got justice to fight for." As the crowd dispersed and Tanya settled into her new office, Marcus knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked, his expression serious. "Of course," Tanya replied, gesturing for him to enter. Marcus sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I've got a case I want you to take the lead on," he said. "It's sensitive, and I think your unique perspective will be invaluable." He handed her a file, and as Tanya opened it, her breath caught in her throat. The case involved a group of Black students who were suing their school district for implementing a covert system of academic tracking that disproportionately placed students of color in lower-level classes, regardless of their abilities. "This hits close to home," Tanya said softly, memories of her own struggles in the education system flooding back. Marcus nodded. "That's why I want you on it. You've lived this, Tanya. You know what these kids are up against in a way that many of us here can't fully understand." Tanya felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but it was a weight she was ready to bear. "I'll do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We're going to make them see that every child deserves an equal shot at success." Over the next few months, Tanya threw herself into the case. She interviewed students and parents, pored over school records, and built a compelling argument that the district's practices were not just unethical, but illegal. As the case gained media attention, Tanya found herself thrust into the spotlight. She handled interviews with grace and eloquence, her passion for justice shining through in every word. But not everyone was happy with the attention the case was receiving. One evening, as Tanya was leaving the office late, she found her car vandalized. Racial slurs spray-painted across the doors. For a moment, she stood frozen, the ugly words burning into her retinas. Then, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Jamal, the building's security guard. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't let them see you break. That's what they want." Tanya straightened her spine, nodding at Jamal's words. "You're right," she said. "Can you call the police to file a report? I've got some calls to make." That night, as Tanya sat in her living room surrounded by case files, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off the case, or next time it won't just be your car." Tanya's hand shook slightly as she set the phone down. Fear crept in at the edges of her mind, but she pushed it aside. She thought of the student she was fighting for, of all the children who deserved better than a system rigged against them from the start. With renewed determination, she picked up her phone and dialed Marcus's number. "They're trying to scare me off the case," she said without preamble when he answered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you okay? Do you want to step back?" "No one would blame you." Tanya's voice was steel when she replied, "No, I'm seeing this through, but I think it's time we go public with these threats. Show them we won't be intimidated." The next day, Tanya stood before a crowd of reporters, her head held high. "Yes, there have been attempts to intimidate me and derail this case," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But let me be crystal clear. I will not back down. The future of our children is at stake, and I will fight for their right to an equal education with every breath in my body." As clips of her speech circulated on social media and news outlets, Tanya was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Messages flooded in from people across the country, sharing their own stories of discrimination and expressing gratitude for her courage. Among the messages was one that caught Tanya's eye. It was from a young girl named Zoe, one of the students involved in the case. "Ms. Mitchell," the message read, "I was scared to speak up before, but seeing you stand strong makes me want to be brave too. Thank you for fighting for us." Tanya felt tears prick at her eyes as she read Zoe's words. This was why she had become a lawyer. This was why she would continue to fight, no matter the personal cost. As the case progressed, Tanya's reputation grew. She became known not just for her legal acumen, but for her unwavering commitment to justice and her ability to connect with the communities she served. Finally, after months of preparation, the day of the trial arrived. Tanya stood before the court, her opening statement prepared, her resolve unshakable. As she began to speak, laying out the evidence of systemic discrimination and the devastating impact on students of color, Tanya felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she'd experienced before. This was her calling, her chance to change the system from within. "Your Honor," she concluded, her voice ringing with passion, "the children of our community deserve better. They deserve a fair shot at success, regardless of the color of their skin. It's time for this discriminatory system to be dismantled, once and for all." As Tanya took her seat, she caught sight of Zoe in the gallery, the young girl's eyes shining with hope and admiration. In that moment, Tanya knew that win or lose, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The trial stretched on for weeks, each day bringing new challenges and revelations. Tanya worked tirelessly, her nights filled with preparation and her days spent in intense courtroom battles. Finally, Hohen, as the sun set on a crisp autumn day, much like the one when Tanya had first become an attorney, the verdict was announced. The court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, ordering the school district to dismantle its discriminatory tracking system and implement a comprehensive plan for ensuring equal educational opportunities for all students. As the courtroom erupted in cheers, Tanya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Zoe standing beside her, tears streaming down the young girl's face. "We did it," Zoe whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You did it." Tanya pulled Zoe into a tight hug, her own eyes brimming with tears. "No, Zoe," she said softly. "We did it, all of us, together." As they left the courthouse, surrounded by jubilant supporters and flashing cameras, Tanya caught sight of Marcus standing at the edge of the crowd. He gave her a nod of profound respect, a gesture that spoke volumes. Tanya Mitchell had not only won a landmark case, she had taken a significant step towards changing the system she had once believed was insurmountably rigged against her. And this, she knew, was just the beginning. Later that evening, as Tanya sat in her office reviewing the day's events, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an unexpected source, the American Bar Association. Dear Ms. Mitchell, it began, we are writing to inform you that you have been nominated for the Thurgood Marshall Award for your outstanding contributions to the field of civil rights law. Tanya's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. The Thurgood Marshall Award, one of the highest honors in her field. She thought back to the young woman studying in the library, dreaming of making a difference, how far she had come. As she set the phone down, Tanya's gaze fell on a framed photo on her desk. A picture of her standing with Zoe and the other students from the case. Their smiling faces reminded her of why she had chosen this path, why she would continue to fight. With a deep breath, Tanya turned back to her work. There were more battles to be fought, more injustices to be righted, and Tanya Mitchell was just getting started. The next few years saw Tanya's star continue to rise. Her victory in the school discrimination case had put her on the map, and she found herself increasingly in demand. She took on more high-profile cases, each one challenging systemic racism in different sectors, housing discrimination, workplace inequality, police brutality. But success came with its own set of challenges. As Tanya's reputation grew, so did the pressure. Late nights at the office became the norm, and she found herself missing dinners with friends, canceling plans with family. The weight of responsibility she carried, not just for her clients, but for her community, was immense. One particularly grueling day, after losing a motion in a police brutality case, Tanya found herself sitting alone in her office, the weight of defeat heavy on her shoulders. A gentle knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, hastily wiping at her eyes. The door opened to reveal Aisha, her oldest friend and now a successful doctor. "Thought I might find you here," Aisha said softly, taking in Tanya's exhausted appearance. "When's the last time you went home, girl?" Tanya managed a weak smile. "What day is it?" Aisha shook her head, pulling up a chair next to Tanya. "You're running yourself into the ground, Tanya. I know these cases are important, but you can't help anyone if you burn out." "I can't stop, Aisha," Tanya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's so much work to be done, so many people counting on me. If I slow down, if I take a break, I feel like I'm letting them all down." Aisha reached out, taking Tanya's hand in hers. "You're not Atlas, Tanya. You don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders. Remember what you told me when we were kids? We have to look out for each other. That includes looking out for yourself, too." Tanya felt tears prick at her eyes as Aisha's words sank in. She had been so focused on fighting for others that she had neglected her own well-being. "You're right," Tanya admitted. I don't know how to slow down. This work, it's become my whole life." Aisha squeezed her hand. "Then maybe it's time to expand your life a little. Remember when we used to volunteer at the community center, teaching those kids about their rights, helping them see their potential? Maybe it's time to get back to those roots." Tanya felt a spark of inspiration at Aisha's words. She had been so focused on changing the system through the courts that she had forgotten about the power of education and community engagement. The next day, Tanya approached Marcus with a proposal. She wanted to start a mentorship program at Johnson Marks, partnering with local schools and community centers to provide legal education and support to underprivileged youth. Marcus listened intently, a smile growing on his face as Tanya laid out her vision. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need," he said when she finished. "And I think it's exactly what you need too, Tanya. You've been carrying a heavy load. It's time to start building a team to share that load." With Marcus's backing, Tanya threw herself into developing the mentorship program. She reached out to local schools, community leaders, and fellow attorneys who shared her passion for social justice. The program, which they named Justice Roots, launched 6 months later. Tanya stood before a group of eager high school students, her heart full as she looked at their bright, expectant faces. "Welcome to Justice Roots," she began, her voice strong and clear. Each one of you has the potential to change the world. Our goal here is to give you the tools and knowledge to do just that. Whether you want to become a lawyer, an activist, or simply a more informed citizen, we're here to support you every step of the way. As the program grew, Tanya found herself renewed. The energy and passion of the young participants reminded her why she had become a lawyer in the first place. She watched with pride as they tackled mock trials, engaged in debates about constitutional rights, and developed community action plans. One day, as Tanya was leaving a Justice Roots session, she bumped into a familiar face. Richard, the man from the diner incident years ago. He looked older now, his hair grayed at the temples, but his eyes widened in recognition as he saw Tanya. I remember you," he said, his voice hesitant. "You were the waitress who stood up to me." Tanya straightened her spine, ready for confrontation, but what came next surprised her. "I wanted to apologize," Richard continued. "I've thought about that day many times over the years. I was wrong, and your words, they stuck with me. They made me look at my own behavior, my own biases." Tanya felt a mix of emotions: surprise, skepticism, a grudging respect for the humility it must have taken to admit his wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that," she said carefully. "It's not easy to confront our own prejudices." Richard nodded, then gestured to the community center behind them. "I saw the sign for your program, Justice Roots. I was wondering if there might be a way for me to contribute, to make amends, in a way." Tanya studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. Then, making a decision, she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "Come to my office next week. We'll talk about how you can help support the program." As Richard walked away, Tanya felt a sense of hope. If someone like Richard could change, could recognize their biases and work to overcome them, then perhaps real, lasting change was possible. The Justice Roots program continued to flourish, and Tanya found herself achieving a balance she had thought impossible. She was still taking on important cases, still fighting in the courtroom, but she was also nurturing the next generation of advocates and change-makers. It was at one of the Justice Roots sessions that Tanya met someone who would change the course of her life once again. Jason Thompson, a charismatic community organizer, had been invited to speak to the students about grassroots activism. As Tanya listened to Jason speak, she found herself captivated not just by his words, but by his presence. He had a way of energizing the room, of making each person feel seen and valued. After the session, Tanya approached Jason to thank him for coming. As they talked, she was struck by how easy it was to converse with him, how their ideas seemed to flow together seamlessly. "You know," Jason said, a twinkle in his eye, "I've heard a lot about the formidable Tanya Mitchell, but they didn't tell me you were this inspiring in person." Tanya felt a blush creep up her cheeks, something that hadn't happened in years. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Thompson," she quipped back. They exchanged numbers, ostensibly to discuss future collaborations between Justice Roots and Jason's community organization. But as the weeks passed, their text exchanges became more frequent, their conversations extending beyond work. For the first time in years, Tanya found herself thinking about more than just her cases and her cause. She found herself looking forward to Jason's texts, to their coffee meetings that always seemed to run long. One evening, as they walked through a park after a particularly successful Justice Roots event, Jason turned to Tanya, his expression serious. "Tanya," he began, "I hope I'm not overstepping here, but I care about you as more than just a colleague or a friend, and I was wondering if you might feel the same way." Tanya felt her heart race. She had been so focused on her career, on her mission, that she had closed herself off to the possibility of a romantic relationship. But with Jason, it felt different. It felt right. "I do," she said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "I really do." As they continued their walk, hand in hand, Tanya felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced before. She was making a difference in the world, mentoring the next generation, and now opening her heart to love. But even as she reveled in this new happiness, a part of Tanya knew that greater challenges and greater opportunities lay ahead. The fight for justice was far from over, and Tanya Mitchell was ready to take it to the next level. Little did she know, a phone call the next morning would set in motion a series of events that would test her in ways she had never been tested before, and potentially change the course of justice in America forever. The call came early, just as Tanya was pouring her first cup of coffee. The voice on the other end belonged to Senator Maria Hernandez, a fierce advocate for civil rights whom Tanya had worked with on several cases. "Tanya," the senator's voice was urgent. "I need your help. The president is considering nominees for the next Supreme Court justice, and your name has come up." Tanya nearly dropped her mug. "Senator, I'm honored, but surely there are more experienced judges who—" "Stop right there," Senator Hernandez cut in. "We need someone with your perspective, your passion, your understanding of how the law affects real people. You've been in the trenches, Tanya. You've seen firsthand how our justice system fails communities of color. We need that voice on the highest court in the land." As the senator continued to outline the process, Tanya's mind raced. The Supreme Court. It was a possibility she had never even dared to dream of. The potential to shape the interpretation of laws for generations to come was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'll need to think about this, Senator," Tanya said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." "Of course," Senator Hernandez replied. "But don't take too long. The president will be making his decision soon, and if you're interested, we need to start preparing." After hanging up, Tanya sat in stunned silence. Her first instinct was to call Jason, but she knew she couldn't discuss this with anyone yet. Instead, she found herself driving to the one place where she always felt centered, the old Detroit Public Library where her journey had begun. As she walked through the familiar stacks, memories washed over her, the long nights of study, the rejections, the triumphs. She thought of Zoe and the other students she had fought for, of the Justice Roots participants and their bright, hopeful faces. And then she thought of her parents, of the sacrifices they had made to give her a chance at a better life. What would they say if they could see her now, considering a nomination to the highest court in the land? With a deep breath, Tanya made her decision. She would put herself forward for the nomination. Win or lose, she owed it to herself and to every person who had believed in her to try. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Tanya worked closely with Senator Hernandez and a team of advisors, preparing for the intense scrutiny she would face if nominated. Every aspect of her life, both personal and professional, would be put under a microscope. When the president officially announced her nomination, the reaction was immediate and intense. Supporters hailed it as a historic move, a chance to bring a fresh perspective to the Supreme Court. Critics questioned her experience, her age, her unconventional path to the law. Tanya found herself at the center of a media storm. Every case she had ever worked on was dissected, every decision scrutinized. Pundits debated her qualifications on national television, and her face was splashed across newspapers and websites. Through it all, Tanya remained focused on her goal. She knew that her nomination wasn't just about her, it was about representation, about showing every young person of color that they too could aspire to the highest levels of the justice system. The Senate confirmation hearings were grueling. For days, Tanya sat before the Judiciary Committee, answering questions about her judicial philosophy, her past cases, her vision for the court. Senator James Hartley, a conservative known for his tough questioning, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Ms. Mitchell, given your unconventional background, How can you assure this committee that you will uphold the Constitution and not let your personal experiences cloud your judgment? Tanya met his gaze steadily. Senator, my experiences are precisely why I will uphold the Constitution with the utmost diligence. I have seen firsthand how the promise of equal justice under law can fall short for many Americans. It is because of these experiences that I have dedicated my life to ensuring that our Constitution's guarantees are not just words on paper, but lived realities for all citizens. She paused, then continued, her voice strong and clear. The beauty of our Constitution lies in its ability to evolve with our nation, to be interpreted in light of our progressing understanding of justice and equality. My role, if confirmed, would be to apply the law fairly and impartially, while also recognizing the real-world implications of judicial decisions on the lives of everyday Americans. As the hearings progressed, Tanya's eloquence and depth of legal knowledge began to win over even some of her harshest critics. Her ability to cite case law, to explain complex legal concepts in accessible terms, and to articulate a clear judicial philosophy impressed many on the committee. But the process took its toll. Long days of testimony were followed by even longer nights of preparation. Tanya found herself missing Jason, missing the work she had been doing with Justice Roots. She wondered, not for the first time, if she had made the right decision in accepting the nomination. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Tanya received an unexpected visitor. As she sat in her hotel room, poring over briefing documents, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Zoe standing there, now a poised young woman in her early 20s. "Zoe?" Tanya exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "What are you doing here?" Zoe smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm here to testify, Miss Mitchell. The committee wanted to hear from someone who had been impacted by your work, and I volunteered." Tanya felt a lump form in her throat. "Zoe, you don't have to do this. The scrutiny, the pressure—" "I want to," Zoe interrupted firmly. "You fought for me, for all of us. Now it's our turn to fight for you." The next day, Zoe took her seat before the Judiciary Committee. Her testimony was powerful, speaking to the direct impact Tanya's work had had on her life and the lives of countless others. "Without Ms. Mitchell's fight for educational equality, I wouldn't be where I am today," Zoe said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm now a second-year law student, hoping to follow in her footsteps. Ms. Mitchell didn't just win a case, she changed lives. She showed us that the law could be a force for good, for change. That's the kind of perspective we need on the Supreme Court." As Zoe spoke, Tanya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she had accepted the nomination, not for personal glory, but for Zoe, for the Justice Root students, for every person who had ever felt the weight of an unjust system. The final vote was scheduled for a week later. As the Senate convened, Tanya sat in the gallery, her heart pounding. Jason squeezed her hand reassuringly, while Aisha, Marcus, and a group of Justice Root students sat nearby, a silent chorus of support. The roll call began, each vote feeling like an eternity. As the final tally was announced, Tanya held her breath. By a vote of 54 to 46, the Senate confirms Tanya Mitchell as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. The gallery erupted in cheers. Tanya felt tears streaming down her face as Jason pulled her into a tight embrace. She had done it. Against all odds, she had made it to the highest court in the land. As the celebrations died down and reality set in, Tanya found herself standing alone in her new chambers at the Supreme Court. Her fingers traced the spines of the law books lining the shelves, books she had once could only dream of owning. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Chief Justice Anderson, a man known for his brilliant legal mind and unwavering integrity. "Justice Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the court." As they shook hands, Tanya saw a glimmer of something in the Chief Justice's eyes. Respect? Certainly. but also a hint of challenge. "You've had quite a journey to get here," he continued. "I look forward to seeing how your unique perspective will shape our deliberations." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Oh, and Tanya? The real work begins now." With those words, Tanya Mitchell, newest Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, turned to face her desk. On it lay a stack of case briefs, the first of many she would review in her tenure. She took a deep breath, picked up the first brief, and began to read. The fight for justice was far from over, but now she had a new arena in which to wage it, and Tanya Mitchell was ready for the challenge. The years that followed Tanya's appointment to the Supreme Court were marked by both triumphs and tribulations. Her presence on the bench brought a fresh perspective that often challenged the status quo, forcing her colleagues and the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about the realities of justice in America. One of the first major cases to come before the court during Tanya's tenure involved a challenge to a state's voter ID laws, which critics argued disproportionately affected minority communities. As the justices deliberated, Tanya found herself at the center of a heated debate. During one particularly tense conference, Justice Williams, a staunch conservative, argued vehemently for upholding the law. "This is about maintaining the integrity of our elections," he insisted. "It's not discriminatory to ask people to prove who they are before they vote." Tanya leaned forward, her eyes intense. "With all due respect, Justice Williams, we cannot ignore the practical realities of how these laws are implemented. For many in underserved communities, obtaining an ID isn't just an inconvenience, it's a significant barrier." She went on to share stories from her own experiences, of elderly voters who lacked birth certificates, of low-income workers who couldn't afford to take time off to visit government offices during limited hours. Her words painted a vivid picture of the human cost of such laws. As she spoke, Tanya could see the impact her words were having on some of her colleagues. Even Chief Justice Anderson, known for his conservative leanings, seemed to be considering her points carefully. When the court's decision was finally announced, it was a narrow 5-4 ruling striking down the voter ID law as unconstitutional. Tanya had authored the majority opinion, her words ringing out as Justice Kagan read it from the bench. "The right to vote is fundamental to our democracy. Any law that places undue burdens on this right, particularly when those burdens fall disproportionately on certain communities, cannot stand. We must be vigilant in ensuring that our pursuit of electoral integrity does not come at the cost of disenfranchising eligible voters." The decision was hailed as a landmark victory for voting rights, and Tanya found herself once again in the national spotlight. But with increased visibility came increased scrutiny and, at times, danger. As Tanya's profile rose, so did the threats against her. Her inbox filled with hate mail, and security had to be increased at her home and office. The pressure was intense, not just on her, but on her relationship with Jason as well. One night, after a particularly difficult day of deliberations on a contentious case, Tanya returned home to find Jason waiting for her, concern etched on his face. "Tanya," he said softly, "we need to talk." They sat together on the couch, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Jason took her hand, his touch gentle, but his eyes serious. "I'm worried about you," he began. "You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I see how much pressure you're under, how every decision you make is scrutinized and criticized. I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Tanya felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know it's been hard," she admitted, "but this work, Jason, it's so important. I can't back down, not when there's so much at stake." Jason nodded, squeezing her hand. "I know, and I admire you so much for it. I just want you to remember that you're not alone in this fight. You have me, you have your colleagues, you have all those young people you've inspired. Let us help carry some of that weight." His words struck a chord in Tanya. She had been so focused on the enormity of her responsibility that she had forgotten the importance of leaning on her support system. With a deep breath, she made a decision. "You're right," she said, leaning into Jason's embrace. "I can't do this alone. And I don't have to." From that day forward, Tanya made a concerted effort to find balance. She continued to pour herself into her work on the court, but she also made time for self-care, for her relationship with Jason, and for mentoring the next generation of legal minds. She began hosting regular dinners with law students, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. These gatherings became a space for open dialogue about the challenges and opportunities in the legal profession, and a way for Tanya to stay connected to the communities she sought to serve. As the years passed, Tanya's influence on the court grew. Her opinions, whether in the majority or dissent, were known for their clarity, their empathy, and their unwavering commitment to justice. She became a beacon of hope for many, a living example of what was possible when doors of opportunity were opened. But perhaps her greatest impact came not in a courtroom, but in a small community center in Detroit. It was there, 10 years into her tenure on the Supreme Court, that Tanya found herself face to face with a young girl named Amara. Amara, bright-eyed and full of questions, had attended a talk Tanya was giving about the importance of civic engagement. As the event wound down, the girl approached Tanya, her voice quiet but determined. "Justice Mitchell," she began, "I want to be like you when I grow up. But people tell me that girls who look like me don't become Supreme Court justices. What should I tell them?" Tanya felt a surge of emotion as she looked at Amara, seeing in her the same fire, the same determination she had felt as a young woman. She knelt down, meeting the girl's eyes. "Amara," she said softly, "you tell them this. Watch me." She saw the girl's eyes widen, a smile spreading across her face. "Remember," Tanya continued, "every time someone tells you it's impossible, that's your cue to work even harder to prove them wrong. The path won't be easy, but I promise you, it's worth it." As Tanya watched Amara walk away, her head held high, she felt a profound sense of hope for the future. She thought back to her own journey, from a determined young woman studying in the public library to the highest court in the land. It hadn't been an easy road, but every struggle, every setback had led her to this moment. In the years that followed, Tanya continued to serve on the Supreme Court with distinction. Her opinions helped shape the legal landscape of the nation, pushing for greater equality and justice for all. But beyond her legal legacy, it was the lives she touched, the Amaras of the world, the young people she inspired, that gave her the greatest sense of fulfillment. On the day of her retirement, 20 years after her historic appointment, Tanya stood before a packed courtroom. As she prepared to deliver her farewell address, she caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Jason, now her husband of many years. Aisha, her oldest friend. Zoe, now a respected civil rights attorney in her own right. And there, in the back of the room, stood Amara, no longer a little girl, but a poised young woman in her first year of law school. Tanya began to speak, her voice strong and clear. "When I first took my seat on this court, I made a promise to myself, to my community, and to this nation. I promised to never forget where I came from, to always strive for justice, and to use my position to open doors for others as doors were opened for me. As I look back on these past 2 decades, I am humbled by the trust placed in me, and I am proud of the strides we have made. But our work is far from over. The arc of the moral universe may bend towards justice, but it is up to each of us to do the bending. To the young people out there who dare to dream, who face obstacles and doubts, I say this: your voice matters. Your experiences matter. Your perspective is needed. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in the rooms where decisions are made. You belong there precisely because your path has been different. As I leave this court, I do so with a heart full of gratitude and hope. Gratitude for the opportunity to serve and hope for the future of our justice system. The work continues, and I have faith that the next generation of legal minds, diverse, passionate, and committed to equality, will carry it forward. Thank you, and may justice prevail. As applause filled the courtroom, Tanya Mitchell, the girl from Detroit who became the youngest federal judge in U.S. history and a transformative Supreme Court justice, stepped down from the bench for the last time. But her legacy of perseverance, of breaking barriers, of fighting for justice, would continue to inspire generations to come. In Amara's determined gaze, in the countless lives touched by her decisions, in the more diverse and empathetic legal system she helped shape, Tanya Mitchell's impact would live on. Her journey, from rejection to the highest court in the land, had not just changed her life, it had changed the course of justice in America. And somewhere in Detroit, in a small public library, a young girl picked up a law book, daring to dream of following in Justice Mitchell's footsteps. The cycle of inspiration, of breaking barriers, of bending the arc of history toward justice, continued. And it all began with one woman who refused to give up on her dreams, who turned 50 rejections into a historic achievement, and who used her position to hold the door open for those who would follow. The story of Tanya Mitchell was far from over. It lived on in every courtroom, in every classroom, in every person who dared to fight for justice against all odds. And in that continuation, in that enduring legacy, Tanya had achieved something far greater than any legal victory. She had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of perseverance, and a reminder that justice, true justice, was always worth fighting for.